Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today's topic is price discrimination. This is a nice, short, and sweet unit. Gives us some interesting intuition, and we usually talk about this right after monopoly. So, price discrimination. This sounds bad, right? When you hear discrimination, we usually have a negative connotation, and that's appropriate, for discrimination in certain types. When I look up discriminate in the dictionary, though, that's sort of the second definition, right? The one that has to do with making generalizations about people based on outward characteristics. And in the dictionary, the second definition says to distinguish by class or category without regard to individual merit, show preference or prejudice. That's why I think we have a negative connotation for discrimination. But the verb to discriminate can also just mean to choose, right? To distinguish, to make a clear distinction, to make sensible decisions or judge wisely. We all discriminate all the time, right? And we choose some clothes, we leave others behind. We discriminate about, what we eat, about, what we drive, what we wear, right? Every time we choose, we are in some way discriminating. So whenever we talk about price discrimination in economics, we're talking about charging a different price for the same good or service to different groups of people. That's what we mean by price discrimination, and there are lots of examples of it out there. Your school, my employer, right? It price discriminates, right? All of you probably don't pay exactly the same tuition. So this is older data. I should go back and update this. But years ago, when published, right, the sticker price for tuition and fees, that's not room and board, right? But for tuition and fees was $27,370 again. And then plus, books and supplies and some other things. Understand, I need to update this. That's older, but not everybody paid that, right? So you had all different kinds of grants, right? This is all data that's available from IPEDS, the Post-Secondary Educational Data Service. It's a government database, and all the schools are listed there. So if you look at federal grants, federal student loans, the average amount over here is pretty significant, right? So when you put it all together, the average, there's average grants, then there are loans, and when you put it all together, they're pretty significant. But if you take off and look at the net of what people are paying, the average net price of attendance, for in around the same time as this other data was $22,900. So that's $5,000 or so off of the sticker price on average. Some people pay less than that, some people pay more. So the point is that that's one example of price discrimination where people are charged different prices. We'll look at a few others. But first, in order to price discriminate, let's look at what you need. You have to have some market power. Without market power, there's no, then you're in perfect competition and everybody pays the same price that's equal to the marginal cost of production. So price discrimination can only happen when there is some market power. You have to be able to identify groups with different elasticities of demand. You want to separate out the people who are more sensitive to price and from people who are less sensitive to price. And you need to be able to distinguish between them and then charge them different prices. And so because of that, you have to be able to prevent resale. Otherwise, there'd be an arbitrage opportunity, right, where people who qualify for the low price would buy up a bunch and sell it to people who don't qualify for that price, and be willing to pay the higher price. So those are the three things that you need in order to price discriminate. Another example over here on the right, coupons. Right? There are coupons out there. You just have to clip them out of the Sunday paper or, out of the flyer or on your phone even, right? There are electronic coupons now, but it's a hassle, right? It requires effort. And so many people don't use the coupons. They value their time and highly, and they're willing to pay more. Their demand is more inelastic. For some people who are especially price sensitive, they have a lower opportunity cost of their time, the lower budget, they're especially sensitive to price. Their demand is more elastic, more price sensitive. They will use the coupons, and therefore the store and the manufacturer, they manage to charge those two different groups different prices for basically the same thing. So a couple examples. One of them, I don't want you to worry too much about these three different kinds. I just want you to be aware of them and then the efficiency implications of all of them collectively. But second degree price discrimination is just when you charge one price for the first unit and a lower price for the second or additional units. So again, this is a dated example, but two CDs for $10 or $5.99 each, right? So basically the first one is $6, but if you buy two, you pay $6 for the first and basically $4 for the second, right? Because you get them for $10. That's second degree price discrimination. Third degree price discrimination is when you charge people, different groups. So what I was referring to, that Fisher does, that's third degree price discrimination. You also see it at the movies. Or if we all went to the movies, for one thing, you pay a different price in the afternoon than in the evening, right? There might be a matinee price and an evening price, standard evening price. But then beyond that, there are discounts, right? I imagine if you went to the movies, you would whip out your student ID and try to get the student rate, right, which is cheaper. Someday, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be old enough to get the senior citizen discount, right? So that's generally students and seniors often have more time and less income, and their demand is therefore more elastic. They're more sensitive to price, and they charge them a little bit lower price. Where people who don't fall into either of those categories may have more inelastic demand, right? And they might be willing to pay the higher price. And so they're able to charge different people different prices for the same seats in movie theaters. Airlines do it all the time. The type didn't show up when I tried to move this graphic in, but this just shows on a given flight. This was from a textbook, and they took actual data and they found the various prices. Now there's a difference, right, between first class and regular steerage, right, economy class, but all of these prices, depending on how far out in advance you booked them, whether or not you stayed over the weekend, like there are lots of signals that they will use to give you a different price. And so almost everybody on this plane paid a different price for their seat. That's third degree price discrimination. Now, the other kind that we should talk about here, and then we'll look at the efficiency considerations of all of them, is perfect price discrimination. And this is almost impossible to fully implement. But if you could, this is what it would look like. So you have your downward sloping demand, your marginal revenue curve is below it and it falls faster. Here's your marginal cost curve. The profit maximizing monopolist would choose, right, if they had to sell all at one price, right, would pick Q star here and P star here. And so they would sell this quantity, right, at this price. They'd earn that rectangle in total revenue. And then they'd have costs equal to their marginal cost at Q star. And they'd earn some, hopefully for them, some economic profit. And they would maximize that profit by picking Q star, right, and P star. But that's selling every unit at the same price. Price discrimination allows them to sell at different prices. And perfect price discrimination allows you to sell every single unit at the highest possible price you can. Which means, basically, you can sell to Al at this price, and you can sell to Bob at this price, and Carol, and David, and Ethel, and Frank, and Gertrude, and right, just work your way down here. Every single unit you could sell at a different price to the consumer who's willing to pay the absolute maximum for it. Now, and then if that's the case, then the marginal revenue of every single unit would be, right, that point on the demand curve. And so the profit maximizing output level would be over here, right, with perfect price discrimination. With perfect price discrimination, you're selling at all of the points on the demand curve until you get down here to the marginal cost curve. So what does that mean? You get out here, like even the monopolist, if they could perfectly price discriminate, they would produce all the way out to here, which you may recall from the end of our discussion on monopoly, that is actually the competitive outcome, right? In a perfectly competitive marketplace, you would expect to get out here. Right, so this is the quantity with the monopolist with perfect price discrimination, but that's also the quantity you would expect in a perfectly competitive market. So what's that mean? That means the deadweight loss is gone. Under perfect price discrimination, there's no deadweight loss. Now, the other thing to remember, is there any consumer surplus? All right, consumer surplus is the difference between the maximum they're willing to pay and what they actually have to pay, but they actually end up paying their maximum willingness to pay. So there is absolutely no consumer surplus, but there is maximum producer surplus, right? Because the producers get the different, they get everything under the demand curve. That is all, like they so what if the marginal cost of that unit was there, and then I guess what we should find is the average cost, and then say, well, if on average, if every unit costs them a certain amount and they get to charge this price up here, then that is pretty cool, right? So the producers, they do very well. Overdid that. Let's put the marginal cost curve back in here. Oh, well, that's not right. See, when you bump it by accident, you got to make sure you get it back in the right place. Oh, it had to go through that point too. I'm sorry, hang on. There we go. So the takeaway here is then that there is no deadweight loss, at least in the theoretical sense. The problem is, when can you do this? When can you perfectly price discriminate and sell to every single buyer at their exact absolute maximum willingness to pay? I have trouble thinking of examples, right, where you can do that. But that would be at the extreme. Perfect price discrimination could cause a monopolist to behave like a perfectly competitive market, at least in terms of the amount produced. The price they charge, they're going to max out, right? But the economist, remember, is more concerned about the deadweight loss than about who gets the surplus. At least the economic surplus here still exists. So now we can't expect that most of the time we'd be able to achieve perfect price discrimination, and that seems unlikely. But what about lesser degrees of price discrimination? Well, let's go back and draw that. There's a demand curve. There's the marginal revenue curve. There is the marginal cost curve. So the profit maximizing monopolist would produce there and charge this price. Right? So our whole concern about monopoly is that, at least compared to the competitive outcome, let's put the dot out here, right? This is sort of the ideal. This is the quantity, that you'd expect in a competitive marketplace, and then you'd expect it probably at this price, right? The price in competition. So why are we concerned about the monopolist? Well, the monopolist restricts output and jacks up price. And so what do they do in the meantime? Well, as a result of that, under the competitive scenario, you would have had this big area of consumer surplus. Under monopoly, you only have this smaller amount of consumer surplus, right? The producer gets more, right? The producer then gets all of this area under here, including this rectangle that would have been consumer surplus, right, in a competitive marketplace. But then, and here's the other problem, right? The reason we don't like it is because of this area right here, which represents a deadweight loss, right? Potential gains from trade that are not realized. But what if, let's go back up to the movie theater. Suppose suppose that $8 right here is, let me get the right thing here. Suppose that the $8 right here, you can't see that, can you? There we go. Suppose that that's the price in monopoly. And that's how, so let's suppose that this is the movie theater and that this P star, this price in monopoly, we're going to suppose that this is $8, right? And that's how they maximize their profits. But if you're running a movie theater, what's the marginal cost of letting a few more people in the door? If you have empty seats, right? If every seat in the theater is not full, the marginal cost of letting additional people in is really low, right? Does the air conditioning have to work a little bit harder? Is there a few more, a few more people use the bathroom? So yeah, your costs are higher, but only a little bit, right? The ticket taker has to scan a couple more tickets. but it's not really that high. Plus, what if you luck out and they buy something at the concession stand, right? That probably covers all those costs anyway. So the idea is that if you have empty seats, the marginal cost of letting additional people in is pretty low. Now, if you just charged everybody a low price rate, you'd lose money because you're not at the profit maximizing price. But what if there were some additional people, let's say the senior citizens, who won't come in $8? Now, the truth is some of them probably would, right? But if there are some who wouldn't come at $8 but will come at $5.75, what does that look like in our graph? Well, we're going to charge some people, pick a different color here, we're going to charge some people $8, right? And then we're going to let some additional people in at $5.75. So some additional people are right here. That means these people right here, right, between the initial Q, right, between Q star and this level right here, these are additional people coming at the senior citizens rate, right? So, so these are, let's say, customers using the senior rate. That's this distance right here. And you're charging them this amount, and so you're selling these additional seats. So what does that mean? There's still a deadweight loss, but it's smaller than before, right? There's no, the deadweight loss is now limited to this area. These are the losses, right? The potential gains that are never realized. So the deadweight loss is much smaller before, and there's a little more consumer surplus, right? Because some of these senior citizens would have paid this price and they get to pay this other price. So here's additional consumer surplus. And then, of course, who else wins? Well, the movie theater, because they let all these people in, right, at this price, and marginal cost was down here, and so they're made better off as well. And so price discrimination, which, you know, based on the name at first you might have a negative reaction to, moves us in the direction of the competitive outcome. It's, you know, there's still a deadweight loss here. There's still potential gains from trade, but it's smaller than it would have been without price discrimination. So price discrimination actually reduces some of those costs of monopoly and moves us in the direction of the competitive outcome. So we ought to think again about you know, how terrible it is. Maybe price discrimination. I mean, we don't like it whenever someone else is paying a lower you know, tuition or price for the cruise or the airline ticket, someone else. But ultimately, from a social perspective, it may be reducing deadweight loss. So there you go. If you have questions, please follow up. Otherwise, we'll be moving on to other